When I think of the cross, I think of the insults and the mockery that came from the crowd. I think of a painful 39 lashes and the excruciating pain from a thorn-filled crown. When I think of the cross, I think of brutal suffering and the ultimate sacrifice that Jesus willingly stepped into. You see, the greatest act of love is for the innocent to stand in place for the guilty. And that's exactly what Jesus did when he stood in place for you and me. It's what we call grace. And in a moment of grace, far beyond anything that we could ever comprehend, Jesus took on all our anger, all our anxiety, all our brokenness, all our pain, all our past, every single mistake, all our shame. He took on all the things that we try to carry, but they're just so heavy. But Jesus didn't come just to simply take those things. He came to give us freedom. Because of him, you're no longer lost to your past. Because of him, you're no longer a slave to your shame. Because of him, you're no longer a prisoner to your pain. Because of him, you're no longer bound to your sin. Because of Jesus, we can actually take these things and lay them down at the foot of the cross. See, God's love has liberated us, you and me. Free to forever walk in the light of his amazing grace.
Well, good morning and welcome to Good Friday. It's going to be a good day.
Gonna be.
I want to introduce to you my friend, my mentor, Dr. Don Fanning. Don and I got to know each other 20 years ago. But prior to that, Don and his wife Jan, native of Pensacola, Don and Jan served for 30 years in South America, planting churches, reaching unreached people tribes, people groups in the jungles. Don is a pilot. He flew bush planes while in South America. Crashed 2, walked away from 2 crashes. So that's God's hand on you for sure. After 30 years there, Dr. Jerry Faldwell called him and said, Don, I want you to come be our Dean of Missions for the Missions College at Liberty. And Don received and accepted that invitation. And so for 17 years, he served there at Liberty. And then when he retired, he and Jan moved back to Pensacola. That's when Don and I got to know each other by way of computer stuff.
Right.
Called me, had a computer question, and little did we know, 20 some odd years later, we will have become the best of friends. He is certainly a mentor. Don accompanied me on the 6th trip to Nepal, the first trip after COVID in March of 2021. And it was at that time we were there. It was Easter weekend. And on that Friday, I asked Don, I said, tell me about the events of Good Friday, the hourly events. And as he shared with me, I cannot express the impact it had on me. So often we just go through Good Friday anticipating what are we going to do on Easter, go to church, have dinner, be with family. Good Friday is a day that will impact you when you begin to realize what happened, why it happened, and the timing thereof. So, Don, thank you for being our guest today. I'm excited to walk through these hours with you and kind of recount what we discussed in the poll as we look at the events of Good Friday hour by hour. We're going to take them in blocks of time. We'll begin this session talking about the time from pretty much midnight Thursday to noon, 9 or 9:30 in the morning. We'll talk about the two trials. We'll talk about Jesus carrying the cross. And then the next session, don't forget, tune in for that one. The next session, we'll pick up what occurs from noontime until 3. And then at 3 o'clock, the 3 o'clock session, the third session we'll do today, we'll talk about that final hour, the 3 o'clock, the 9th hour, as Scripture tells us. So with that, Don, I'm excited. I can't wait to walk through this again. I will never forget March 2021, Good Friday in Nepal with you. What a great trip, and just sharing with me those events. So what we glean from this is timing, the timing of the events. And you mentioned how God's timing is perfect, but you kind of caught me with something that you said regarding, well, God had to deal with this. And I'm like, whoa. I thought everything just went like clockwork. But then you said, but man has free will and God had to deal with that. Help me understand that. And I think it goes back to when Lazarus was raised from the dead. Am I correct?
That's right. That's when the sequence really is set into motion with the resurrection of Lazarus, or the restoration of Lazarus, I should say. And that's what sparked the animosity from the high priest, where they realized this is desperate. In fact, they make this statement at the end of chapter 11 that if we don't do something, if we don't stop him now, all of the people are going to believe in him and they're not going to believe in us anymore. So it was a survival that they had to face by getting rid of Jesus. And that's at the end of chapter 11 of John's Gospel. Then it becomes really fascinating because of the other timing element that this set into motion. Because all through his life, he kept talking about when they wanted to get him to manifest himself and to show himself more so than he had been before, where he just seemed like an ordinary man, but that he had the powers of walking on water and stopping the storms. And they realized that he was really God in the flesh in a phenomenal way, though they didn't quite understand it all. But when he resurrects Lazarus from the grave after 4 days in the grave, the high priest recognize that someone has to die for the nation, as that's kind of their excuse for why they should kill him. And that's how chapter 11 ends. And then as they move into chapter 12, Jesus and his disciples recognizing that the timing isn't quite right. And there's two factors of the timing that were very important. One was the prophecy of Daniel that gave the 70 weeks of years, which was 443 years, some years from the time of the declaration of Cyrus back in Babylon, or for their return to Jerusalem and rebuilding Jerusalem. And then the 69th week terminates with the cutting off of the Messiah and giving the exact date as the end of the 69th week. But when you add those dates up from the time of the declaration, it goes all the way to the time of the crucifixion, amazingly. But the phenomena of that is that there was another factor that was to be taken into account, and that was the coincidence of the Passover, which was held on a certain day of the month, which meant that the day of the week changed every year to coincide with the Sabbath day, because the Passover was a special Sabbath, And then the regular Saturday of the week was a Saturday. It was also a Sabbath day. And when those two dates coincided was when the Passover and the Sabbath occurred on the same day, that Jesus would be crucified just the day before. And that coincided with the whole events of the Passover, which were symbolic of the sacrifice of Christ on the cross. And so it was very important, the timing of those events, that they coincided. And so for the whole life of Jesus' ministry, he kept saying, my time is not right. And what he was looking for was the coincidence of these two, coinciding of these two events simultaneously to give the fulfillment of the typology and the prophecies and all that had gone before. And yet Jesus isn't manufacturing this or making it happen. He's just foreseeing it, that the people would do this at just this right time. And so he couldn't provoke their killing him prematurely. He couldn't provoke them to stone him as they would customarily do. They had to make it so that they would appeal to the Romans and get him crucified so that he would shed his blood and nailed to a cross, as the prophecies all indicated.
So the timing is critical here, and with Jesus raising Lazarus, you said he then took the guys up to a little village from Bethany just to buy some time.
Right. Yeah, he leaves Bethany, which is just a little bit outside of Jerusalem, and when he moves up into Ephraim, which is this little town, insignificant, but I think it's the only time that he ever visited there. But he stays there for several days. Interesting, the town probably only had 10 or 15 different houses, or very little to call anybody's attention. But that's where he would spend his last days before going into the final days before his crucifixion.
And the triumphal entry, and
yeah, he would come back then to Bethany, and that's where he has his last meal with Lazarus. That's when Mary comes and anoints him with oil. Remember, Judas then accuses him of wasting this ointment, because it wasn't for people; it was really for a corpse. It was designed with a very strong aroma to overcome the stench and the smell of a decaying body. But Jesus says, no, she has come beforehand to anoint me to the burying. That is, he's saying that my body is going to die, is not going to decay or anything, but I'm going to die within just a few days, is basically what he was saying. And he knew exactly how it was all going to play out. And so he's making it happen by just being at the right place at the right time for what had to happen.
And a lot of this is, you said this timing was, God had to deal with this because he gave man free will.
Yeah, with the free will of man, they could really do whatever they wanted to, but sometimes in critical decisions and times like this, things become very inevitable. If the high priest wished to defend their position in Judaism, they virtually had to get rid of Jesus. He had to die. And that's exactly what they said at the end of chapter 11, is that one has to die for the nation. And they use that as an excuse, some prophetic prophecy that one would die for the nation, not realizing that was really a prophecy of the Messiah, but they're just using it as an excuse to be able to kill Jesus, which was perfect for the plan that Jesus had for dying for the redemption of man.
Wow. Well, why don't we do this? That kind of sets the stage. We've gone a week before. I want to fast forward up to, the Last Supper. So it's the evening of the Last Supper. Then he gave the disciples discourse there. He washed their feet. Judas betrayed him or left. And then from there they go to the garden. And that's where I want to pick up the timing here. We're in the garden, and then the arrest occurs. They bring, the high priest brings 600, was it 600 soldiers, thereabouts? It was a large
There's a
number.
large number, yeah.
And pick it up there, Don, because you mentioned about Peter and him cutting off the ear of the servant, or the high priest's servant.
Yeah, one of the
Let's
soldiers.
pick it up there, and then we'll ease on into the 4 a.m., 6 a.m. time frame.
Okay, during the Lord's Supper, Jesus had told him that he would be betrayed and arrested, and that they would take him, and that Peter blurts out, he's with his proud arrogance of kind of a narcissistic leader.
Far
probably.
be it.
Yeah, he said, "I will defend you. I'll die for you," and he sincerely meant that. I mean, and he literally meant it. And when they came to arrest him, he proved that he meant exactly what he said. He whips out his sword. Interesting that he's carrying a sword. First time it's ever mentioned in the Gospels. But he's armed and ready to defend Jesus. And he takes a swipe at the head of the first person that steps up to grab Jesus. And the person obviously ducks like something like this, and shook, the sword swishes by his head and just clips his ear. Well, Jesus picks that up and puts it back in its place and heals it in a phenomenal way. You can imagine how this soldier or guardian of the temple felt after being healed perfectly, nearly losing his life. How could he keep on with his animosity towards Jesus? Yet at the same time, it had to happen. But the important part there, I think, the unwritten part, is that Peter was rebuked. And whenever a person is rebuked in the midst of sacrificing and giving his all and doing the best and doing exactly what he said he was going to do, and Jesus rebukes him. We don't need swords in the battle that I'm in. This is a spiritual battle, he might be saying. And the idea was that Peter felt like his best efforts weren't what Jesus was looking for at all. And subsequently, this kind of burned in his heart, I think, and later we'll see what happens when, in his denial, it probably had an effect on why Peter denied him.
Yeah, rebuked publicly.
Yeah.
It was probably embarrassing.
Very embarrassing, yeah.
Yeah. Wasn't there a note, and I'm trying to find it here, at one point when all the soldiers were there in the garden, Jesus spoke or did something and they all fell down.
Yeah, that was, he just said a word and then they all fell down. A powerful demonstration of not only the authority, but the power of Jesus. And that never had happened before, never happens again. That's the demonstration that in spite of their wanting to crucify him, they could not help but fall over at his spoken word. Power, demonstrating to the last minute his divinity and that they were completely out of league, their authority and out of their league coming to arrest him. And yet he never resists after that. He just simply lets them take him and do what is on their will, what they want to do to him. He lets them do it. He puts himself into their hands at that point.
Wow. So this is somewhere around midnight. So between midnight and we're going to pick it up at 4 a.m.
Yeah, well, this is probably pretty close to that. This is just before when they take him right from there over to Caiaphas's house.
Okay. So we're seeing in the 4 a.m., 6 a.m. time slot.
Before that, he had been praying.
He'd been praying, right.
Remember what he prayed. This is really critical here, that he said he didn't, and human side of Jesus is revealed, that this is going to be, he foreknew, this is kind of interesting, he foreknew what this was going to be, that it wasn't going to be easy to die on a cross, but worse, it wasn't going to be easy at all for him to be rejected of the Father. His fear was not of dying on the cross. The Romans had killed some 30,000 people by crucifixion in Jerusalem, and it was so commonplace, they hardly felt the awfulness of it. And if the Romans are going to get you, they're going to probably crucify you. You kind of already accepted that the death is not going to be that unusual. But it was what God was doing that he could hardly handle. He knew he had to do it. This was the only hope of humanity. The only hope for mankind was that God take the sinful place of man and suffer the consequences of sin by dying on a cross. Cursed is he that hangeth on a cross was the prophecy or the declaration of the Old Testament. And he fulfilled that he was going to be cursed for man's sin, and that's what he couldn't handle. And he said, Lord, if there's any other way, but there is no other way. And so, Lord, not my will, but yours be done. And he just trusted the Father to fulfill the will of God, that he take the place of sinful man on the cross. Wow, it's just amazing how he surrendered.
We will look at some lessons learned, shall we say, at the end of each of these sessions. And we'll come to that in a minute. And I want to pick back up on that, Don, about accepting God's will, even when it's hard. But, not my will, but thy will be done. So we're going to look now at the first of two trials that occurred. This first trial occurred prior to around 6 a.m. With Annas, who was the father-in-law of the high priest Caiaphas.
Right.
And so they take Jesus.
And former high priest.
And so they take Jesus to Annas' house. This was the Jewish trial. And then we'll see in a few minutes the first of two. And then we'll see the Roman trial.
The first of two Jewish trials.
Two Jewish trials.
Yeah, because the first one really with Annas is the idea of they have to convince him of Jesus' guilt in order to give motivation for all of the Sanhedrin to gather. Because you see, this is really kind of an illegal gathering. There's no law or rule that says they can gather at night, and particularly before daylight. And this is between the 4 and 6 o'clock in the morning hour. And this is no precedent for this has been set. And so with Annas' approval that he is worthy of blasphemy and condemned, then they can gather all of the Sanhedrin, because they need the whole of the Sanhedrin to condemn him in order to go to the Romans and get their condemnation. And it's amazing how all of this has to happen in order to get him crucified, which is, they don't realize how much they're fulfilling Isaiah 53 and all of these steps. They're just expressing their hatred and fear and rejection of their Messiah. It's really quite amazing. But when they go then before Caiaphas, now this is, and the Sanhedrin, which is really part of the temple. Around the outside of the temple grounds, there are these colonnades, and part of the colonnade is this big, large room in which the Sanhedrin, the 70 leaders of the Jewish religion, that's where they gather for making laws or condemning people or whatever else they have to do as a Jewish nation, is done in that particular room. And subsequently, outside of the Sanhedrin is the large area, open area around the temple grounds, and that's where one of his disciples, John, goes into the Sanhedrin because he has a family member and has a right to be there, and he listens to what happens on the inside. And then Peter on the outside has already been rebuked by Jesus and is kind of gathering around people in in the early pre-dawn coldness and around fires and trying to stay warm. And that's when he's accused really 3 times of being a follower of Jesus, and which puts him in a threatening situation that he may end up being thrown before the Sanhedrin simultaneously. And out of whatever motivation, he denies the Lord 3 times. And coincidentally, the 3rd time when he denies the Lord, he's finished the condemnation exactly at the same time before Caiaphas, and has marched out just at the dawn of that morning, and to be taken over to the Romans. And at that moment, he walks out of the Sanhedrin and looks across the courtyard at a little fire where Peter had been warming himself and had just denied the Lord the 3rd time. And he hears the cock crow, and that's exactly what Jesus says: before the cock crows, you will deny me 3 times. And he did it exactly as Jesus foresaw it. Jesus didn't make him do that. It was that Peter did exactly what Jesus had foreseen he would do, because he knows everything that's in man. And when he did that, he looked up and saw Jesus coming out of the Sanhedrin to be taken over to the Roman fortress to be tried before Pontius Pilate, and their eyes met. Jesus looked up and saw Peter. Peter saw Jesus looking at him just as he had denied the Lord. What an impact.
Can you imagine? Oh, I can't imagine. I can't imagine.
What a drama.
Yes, much so. This was, I would say, some of Jesus's darkest hours.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, he'd had no rest, okay? No sleep from the Lord's Supper time, the Last Supper time to right now, no sleep. So he's been awake for more than 24 hours.
Yeah.
And probably Peter, well, no, because the guys went to sleep in the garden. He had to wake them up. But all that to say, darkest hours. The arrest.
Remember that when John chapter 1, he came unto his own, and his own received him. This hurt him more than the Roman trial, where it was just pure false accusations and embarrassment. But the whole thing is just the rejection of the entire nation of Israel. And then on top of it, even his disciples fled or denied him. That's what made it the darkest hour.
The darkest hours, but yet the darkest is yet to come.
Yeah.
The darkest of darkest that we will never experience.
Yeah, that's right.
We Christians will never experience what Jesus is going to experience in the ninth hour. So he'd been up all night. His disciples had abandoned him. Peter denies him 3 times. Goes to the first 2 trials, the Jewish trials, and they're all trumped up. It's all leveraged against him.
Yeah.
And yet he just lets it go. He goes along with it. He's following God's will, his Father's will. And sometimes that's hard for us to do. When we know it's God's will to walk through a tough time, sometimes that's hard. Most all times it's hard. But Jesus being our example, we have to put on the full armor and walk through these times that are dark in our lives. So let's just quickly touch on a few things that we could learn from the lessons here. The first of those would be when Jesus was in the garden, they asked, who's Jesus? Jesus said, I'm he. And so we're to speak truth always.
Unashamedly.
Unashamedly speak the truth.
Never try to hide it.
We can expect the deck to be stacked against us, as we see here with this Jewish trial. Everything has been stacked against him falsely. We need to understand that we can expect that.
Yeah.
And so it's going to happen.
And it's honorable.
Yes.
Just look at it not as a fearful thing, but as an honorable thing. That the opposition against us as Jesus taught us, is really opposition against him. And yet we get to be the vessel for the unbelieving expressions against God's servants. And what a privilege to be given the privilege of suffering for Jesus. And that's the honorable nature of what it means to be willing to suffer for him, and then to be able to do it. One thing is to be willing to do it. The other thing is when it actually happens, you want to feel that just sort of sense of healthy pride that you were counted worthy to suffer for Jesus. And however little we suffer now, but it's still
It's
an
like
honorable
it's paradoxical.
sensation.
It's a paradox.
Yeah.
The Christian life is a paradox compared to
Yeah.
the world. They don't understand. So all in all, we need to realize the world is going to come against us, falsely accuse us, stack the deck
That's right.
against us. Anything to suppress or stop the gospel from being shared. So, okay, that gets us up to the 6 a.m. hour. Let's look at 6 to 8 o'clock. And this is when we see the Roman trial. They take Jesus then to Pontius Pilate, and then, of course, a little side note over to Herod, and then back to Pontius Pilate. So he's questioned by Pilate. And I can remember growing up, I'm thinking, that Pilate guy, he was right on the edge. He was almost there, but then he succumbed to politics, popularity, all of that. But yet he tried to say, hey, your deal, I'm out. But yet
And had he done that, had he been successful at that, they would have stoned him. And then that would have not fulfilled the prophecy. Because as cursed is he that hangeth on a tree, he needs to be crucified as he sheds his blood. And in order to fulfill all of the pictures of the death of Christ and the prophetic images of him. I mean, it's really amazing. You know, we kind of keep rooting for him that Pilate's going to be successful and get out, but no, Satan is manipulating the people and encouraging them in a fanatical passion against Christ, and subsequently they are just determined to destroy him and get the whole Roman Empire against him, that is the whole world against him, and to show then the world that the world doesn't want Jesus, and this is a satanic thrust that's being played on these Jewish people. And that's why they're manipulating Rome to crucify him. But it's just amazing.
The timing, the events, everything is just amazing. And again, this is what just sparked my interest back in 21 in Nepal when you were sharing this with me.
Yeah.
It's just so Pilate did find, or thought maybe he found a way out of this. When he found out Jesus was a Galilean, he was from Galilee, he sent him over to Herod.
Right.
Herod's kind of like the governor of that area.
Yeah. Of Galilee.
And Herod, this is the same Herod that had John the Baptist beheaded. The Herod that I contend is narcissistic. He's all about himself and everything. So Pilate sends Jesus to Herod for Herod to question him or to try and pass him off, basically.
Basically, exactly. And Herod understands that he's being manipulated by Pilate and doesn't fall into the trap because he doesn't want to be guilty of it. Because as he dialogues with him, he realized this man is not guilty of anything of death. And which Pilate had already kind of declared he doesn't see any reason for crucifying him. And so he doesn't fall into the trap, although he's half Jewish himself. He doesn't fall into the trap of yielding to Pilate's manipulation and sends him back.
Yeah, Herod was, I think, wanting to see some miracle. He had heard about him.
Yeah.
And
see if you can impress me, Lord Jesus.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then he also, Herod wanted to kill him or have him killed because he was gaining popularity. That is Jesus.
Yeah, he was a
which
threat.
takes away from Herod, again, the narcissistic governor, as I say.
Paranoid.
So learning from these, we talked back during the 4 a.m. to 6 a.m., we can expect accusations. We can expect the world to come against us.
Right.
And here we see that the world, and I say Herod as an example, is all about themselves.
That's right.
You touched on the honor to be able to suffer for the kingdom. That's an honor. The world doesn't understand that. The world's all about themselves. And so there again, that paradox that we deal with as followers, as children of God, it can be a challenge at times. But yet, when we can see the world and we understand, then we're at an advantage. Because you see people, they're pretty much all about themselves. But yet that helps you maybe find that divine angle to begin to encourage and share with them. We said Pilate was close, but no horseshoe. He tried it, but he didn't make it. So all that to say, the world is like you said, is deceived. Doubt is painted in their minds about what we believe by the evil one.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, there's no better illustration of what Paul wrote about in Ephesians, that we don't fight against kings and princes. We fight against principalities and powers, demonic influences over leaders that will try to get them to fulfill satanic purposes. Remember, Satan is trying to destroy Jesus. He doesn't believe that this is the Messiah has the power to be able to really be the king of the Jews and the ruler of the world. And he wants to show his weakness and how useless he is as a leader. And so he manipulates then these leaders to persuade them that they're going to crucify him and be done with him and destroy him, and which is exactly what Jesus wanted them to do.
That started way back.
Yeah, way back.
That started way back. Remember Moses, the basket baby in the river?
Exactly, yeah.
I mean, the first basket baby in the river. Satan is relentless.
Yeah.
And Herod's dad, or Herod that called for all the male children in Bethlehem to be slaughtered, and that's all Satan's behind all that.
Yeah.
And even today, the evil, the wickedness that we see today, we as Christians can see that when we understand that spiritual realm within where the satanic angels and the good angels reside. They influence our realm. Yeah. And Satan is going to stop at nothing. And though he knows in the end he's toast, he's trying to take as many with him as possible.
That's exactly right. In fact, even today, in this day, when we think we have calm and peace in America, around the world there are more people dying for Christ and being martyred for Christ, tortured for Christ, than ever in history before. Of course, the population is immensely larger today than it has ever been in the history of mankind, but the number of opposers of the gospel are multiplied 1,000 times. And in all places around the world, we hear reports almost on a weekly basis of groups here and there that are being annihilated and killed off just because they're Christians. Wow. This is a pretty terrible day around the world. But it's just beginning.
It's just the beginning, yeah.
Nothing like what it's going to be.
It's not going to get any better.
Not going to get any better.
Not going to get any better. Okay, well, why don't we do this, Don? Why don't we just kind of take a break at this point?
Okay.
We've brought everybody up from the Last Supper all the way through to Pilate and Herod and back to Pilate. And what we'll do is we're going to come back in the next session and we're going to talk about the 8:30 to 8:30 time frame, and then the 9 o'clock or 9:30 to 11, basically when Jesus was beaten and when he was carrying the cross. We'll talk a little bit about Simon of Cyrene and his two boys, and then we'll talk about the soldiers and the people at the foot of the cross. So all that's to come. Stay tuned. Enjoy your early morning here on Good Friday, and we will be back in the next session. I believe it'll air around noon, and we'll share more with you then. And wow, this is great. This is great. Thank you, Don.
It only gets worse before it gets better.
Hey, that's correct. So we'll be back. You stay tuned.